when we approach all of that from this perspective of, I need to do these things to get better, to be a more acceptable human so that I can be more worthy and then I'll be happier. It doesn't work that way. Those things are not designed to make you more worthy. They are designed to make your quality of life better. So we have to start from a foundation of worthiness. We have to start from neutralizing all of these things. These things are all morally neutral. You're not a better person if you can meal prep. They're just functional things. And the only reason to engage in them is because they make your life better.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright.
Oh, hi, Nikki.
Hi, Pete.
How are you? You feeling good?
I am feeling good. How about you?
I'm relieved. We have a new website.
We do. We have a new website, takecontroladhd.com. Same
It's
URL.
still takecontroladhd.com. But
Just
lots
a
of things have
different
moved
look.
around. Yeah, lots of things have moved around. What has not changed is how you find the podcast episodes. I didn't update any of the URLs. Everything still should work the same way it has worked. It just may
We say
look a little bit
should
different.
because
It should. It's as of today, it's very new.
yes.
And so if anything is broken and you know where to find me on Discord, please DM me and let me know if you find something that's all mucked up. I kept Melissa up way too late last night.
You guys were awesome.
Doing link checking and clicking all the buttons and submitting all the forms and testing things. So I guess that is to say, if it's still broken, it means Melissa and I failed to see it. And so we appreciate your contributions there. You're the best. So new website,
check it
very
out.
fun. And much more new stuff coming now that we're on the new website. So stay tuned. We are talking to Casey Davis today, influencer, TikTok,
Yes.
big on TikTok. Are you getting closer to wanting to be on TikTok, Nikki?
No.
With these conversations? No, not yet. Okay. All right.
No, because
just wanna
she's
know.
doing such a great job.
Yeah, she's doing it for us. We don't
Yes.
need to because she's doing fine.
She has a great message. And I love her message. I love how she frames all this stuff. So it's a great conversation.
I think so too. She's wonderful. Before we bring Casey out, head over to takecontroladhd.com. Oh yeah, the new website, and get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there, as you always have been able to do so, or subscribe to the mailing list. Just scroll down to the bottom of literally any page, and you can add your name to the mailing list. We'll send you an email each time a new episode is released. You can connect with us. First and foremost, join that ADHD Discord community. It is wonderful. You can jump there anywhere you see the little Discord happy icon on the website. It'll take you to the invitation. You can join the free community, but if you really want to connect with us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/theADHD podcast. Your membership allows you access to all kinds of fun things that the free community does not see. It's just like unveils, like walking through a platform 9 3/4, and you see so many new wonderful things when you do that. And so we hope that you check that out. If you've been listening to the show for a long time and you've wondered what these resources are, or if you just think, hey, you know what? I really like the ADHD podcast. I like what Nikki and Pete are doing, and I want to support that. I want to support them continuing to be able to grow the show. Then support us. A few bucks a month gets you access to all kinds of new things, including Pete's new podcast, the Placeholder Podcast, which is available only to members of Patreon. You get coffee with Pete and coaching with Nikki at the platinum level, and we have special bonuses at every level of Patreon support. So we surely appreciate you there. Do we have any other news for the good people?
No, not at this point.
Excellent. Well, then it's time. Let's boot up the old TikTok and bring out Casey Davis. Casey? Casey Davis is a licensed professional therapist, author, and speaker, and is the big brain behind the mental health platform Struggle Care. Casey began her mental health journey at 16 when she entered treatment for drug addiction and mental health issues. And she got sober, and then she became a speaker and an advocate for mental health and recovery, and then an influencer on, the internet. She's amazing. And quite recently, she introduced me to Hamper, the coolest laundry service I've ever seen, with a level of enthusiasm that is unmatched for laundry. For all of the above and so much more, thank you, Casey, and welcome to the ADHD podcast.
I am so glad to be here.
Oh my gosh. So where do we even begin, Pete?
Let's talk about you. You're in Houston, right?
I am.
Okay. In Houston. Husband's a lawyer. Delightful. We don't really care about him right now. I am fascinated. We're doing this whole series on influencers in the broader sort of mental health, ADHD, neurodiversity community. And you have a fantastic community yourself. And I'm so curious how you ended up putting yourself in a position where you are a voice to so many people. So I hope we can kind of wind our way through that conversation today. And when you're asked how you ended up where you are, what do you say?
I typically start by saying it was an accident.
As all great things are.
Yeah, I never set out to be an influencer. I never set out to, I'd be an author, any of that. I worked because I went to rehab when I was young. I worked the majority of my therapist career in addiction. And then I started to be a stay-at-home mom. And when I started being a stay-at-home mom, I started just doing family work. So I worked with families that had loved ones in drug rehab, doing boundary work, things like that. And all along that, I've always been a messy person. I've always not really understood how people did clean as you go. I've always been someone to have a mess and kind of a dirty house. And, that has always, but it's always been moderately functional, right? It's fine. It's fine. And I think what was interesting was that when I was in my addiction, there were several things that people could point to that they would say, this is part of why you're not functioning. This is part of what we need to rehab about you. And part of that was I didn't take care of myself physically. So I didn't shower very often. I didn't brush my teeth very often. I never cleaned anything. I was failing out of school. I was late to everything. And then I went to rehab, and I was in rehab for 18 months, inpatient.
Wow.
And we had these very strict schedules, and you do chores every day. You have to shower every day. So they not only rehabbed all of these things about my personality and mental health that needed help, but they also attempted to fix these other ancillary issues about not caring for myself and being messy and not being responsible, and then some other delightful things about me, how I interrupt everyone, how I don't wait for people to finish their question before I start answering. And those things were pointed out to me as these are ways in which you're being selfish and self-centered. And that's going to get in the way of you recovering from your addiction. And this is a part of you being arrogant. So then I get out of rehab, and it in many ways was very helpful. I'm sober. I am in therapy. I am I don't have a ton of distress in my life anymore. My mental health symptoms have all mostly been resolved. And from the first 24 hours of out of rehab, immediately it's and surprise, I'm still messy and don't shower every day.
Right.
Yep.
That didn't get fixed.
Yeah.
Huh?
Turns out that wasn't actually connected to the addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly my ability to take care of myself was impacted, but turns out I am just a messy person. And I just am never going to want to shower every day, and I'm never going to want to brush my hair every day. And, I think the other thing that happened was recognizing, here recently, I got a ADHD diagnosis as an adult, looking back and realizing all of the things that sort of got put up as these moral character failures that I now am oh no, I just had ADHD.
Yes. Well, and that's what I mean by right, you're right. When I say, oh, it didn't get fixed, right? Because of course it's not going to get fixed. It's not broken. It's just part of your ADHD. And that is something I definitely want us to hit on with your book that I found so fascinating was how you did say a lot of these things. They're not, it has nothing to do with morals. Like it is not, care tasks are neutral, contributing to a household are neutral, outsourcing care, your weight, your food, these are all morally neutral. Can you talk more about that? It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that most people, and maybe I have a confirmation bias because I was a therapist and sort of like a high school fuck up, but most people that I know personally and professionally um, are really plagued and or driven by a deep-seated terror that they suspect they are not worthy of love, and they are worried somebody will realize that. And so when you feel that way, it's really easy to over moralize everything in your life because you're constantly looking for that answer. You're constantly looking for evidence of that fear, and constantly looking for validation that maybe that fear is not true. And I think one of the blessings that I got from going to rehab so early, there's a lot of things about my rehab that I don't necessarily agree with, but at the end of the day, I spent a year and a half with 16 other girls that eventually we all just broke down and bared our souls to each other and talked about how much we hated each other, hated ourselves, and how terrified we were that we weren't worthy, and all of the things that we had done that we were ashamed of, and all of the things about ourselves that we were deeply ashamed were irrevocably broken. And we did that. And then at the end, sort of realized that nobody was running, screaming from the room, um, and had this moment of like, oh, we're all broken, and yet we all have this deep vulnerability of wanting to be loved, and we could just decide to love each other. And having that experience of community where somebody knows every single part of you and everything you think is failing and shameful, and having them love you anyways was deeply healing. And so I think that going from that and realizing like I really am worthy of love, it made it easier to see how many things we look to try and like build that case, whether it's, oh, I have the perfect diet, I have a small body, I'm very responsible, I work really hard, I'm such a great lover, I'm so like all of these things that we're moving through life not necessarily trying to figure out what is most functional for me and what brings me joy and what gives me a meaningful life, but instead constantly on this journey of what could I do to be good enough? And then when I feel like I can't do those things, how do I hide that from everybody and try again harder?
I feel like that's a thing that I really connect to because and you know I have a passage from the book, and we should say it's How to Keep House While Drowning. It's fantastic. There's a passage early in the book where you talk about in my work as a therapist, I have seen hundreds of clients who struggle with these issues, and I'm convinced now more than ever that of one simple truth: they are not lazy. In fact, I do not think laziness exists. And I say that not so we can dive necessarily into laziness, but all the things that you're talking about, the things that I respond to when I am feeling judged, whether it's laziness or fear or anxiety, whatever the thing is that is being foisted upon me or that I'm taking on from the world that is triggering my rejection sensitivity so heavily is all self-imposed, right? It's so self-imposed. It is that interest paid on a debt that never comes due, right? I love that so much, and it is likely a projection of someone else who can't figure out all of the same stuff in their own head and body and space, right? I mean, am I getting to something there? Because that is really how it touches me.
Yeah, and I want to hold space for that. I mean, I think it's hard to thread this needle in the self-help space of there is a great amount of my own joy or distress that is within my control by shifting my mindset, by letting go of, these sort of self-imposed judgments of realizing like, oh, nobody's looking at me. I just think everyone's looking at me. There's a huge amount of control I have over that. And I also want to hold space for, people in more marginalized communities are not just dealing with a mindset shift, and people, and you don't even have to be a marginalized community, but for example, I have a lot of followers that have been in abusive relationships where part of that abuse from their partner was being told they were lazy, right? And so it's an interesting, as I say, thing to needle to thread, that we can't fix all of your very real barriers, and there's a good amount of distress that we could decrease in your life by recognizing what part of this have I been unknowingly kind of carrying around that I could just put down right now?
That's not
And I,
mine. And that's the
yeah,
thing, right? It's that, and it's the thing that I get into this with my wife all the time, just around anything. It's like, if there is something that I might say about my son who's a teenager. He's a teenager, right? If it comes off and he's projecting laziness, that's laziness to me, right? It's laziness because that's what I'm seeing. And I am I am therefore saddling him with my perception of what he should be doing. And I feel like when I hear that from somebody else talking about me or my behavior, it is liberating to stop and say, wait a minute, that perspective is not mine to own.
yeah, it's not the objective perspective. And that person, just like I said earlier, most people are moving through life with a deep terror of not being good enough. And so what happens for some people is that there are things that that person is naturally good at, or maybe something that was sort of imposed upon them in an oppressive nature that they, had to deal with for a very long time and put a lot of time and energy to conforming to that. And now what they have is still don't they've sort of quote unquote succeeded at these things that society has told them make them morally good enough, yet still feel deeply insecure. And so now what they're doing is using that by pointing out what you haven't done, because now if they can just feel better than someone else, that can sort of be this cheap substitute for true self-confidence, or that true worthiness is just, well, at least I'm better than this person, so I need other people to be lazy, I need their failures to be of their own making, so I don't have to deal with the anxiety that the world is, just a spinning ball and nothing really makes sense. So I think that's the other side of it, is that we're constantly trying to, push other people down because being above them. And I remember that was something I recognized early in rehab, was realizing that I never felt equal to anyone. I only ever felt better than them or less than them. And I was stepping on the people I felt less than and using them for what they could give me. For example, I had a friend that had a car and I didn't have a car, and I didn't like her and I wasn't nice to her, but I used her for that car and I thought I was better than her. And then I had friends or lovers that I thought were better than me, and their liking of me and acceptance of me was pulling me up and making me feel good enough because they deigned to love me. And recognizing that I always felt like I was on the top of the heap or the bottom of the heap was one of the first aha moments of, this is this like one thing is really running my life and causing harm to a lot of people and causing harm to me.
And it becomes a discussion of like the perils of fill in the blank relativism, right? Whether it's emotional relativism or relationship or productivity relativism. Like I think about your book. It's like, just because my house is dirty and my neighbor's house is clean does not make me worse than them, right? By relationship. I love it.
Well, and it's interesting too when you talk about trauma, because I don't think I have ever read a book about cleaning, or even, anything about cleaning, chores, organization, that even touches trauma. And so it was really interesting, and I am so glad that your voice is out there, because I never personally related that cleaning a toilet could trigger someone. It never dawned on me until I read it in your book, and I thought, "Wow, uh, okay, that makes a lot of sense." And so I'm just curious, like, what were your thoughts in bringing that into this book?
Well, it's interesting because I agree with you that most of us don't think about trauma and cleaning in the same space. But what I found as I was making videos online and I was talking about sort of this gentle way of approaching home care and all these mindset shifts and all these sort of hacks for your neurodivergent brain to be able to get things done, I started hearing story after story from people that follow me, about how cleaning is hard for them because of the experience that they had with cleaning as a child. And their experiences ran the gamut of the whole thing, right? You had people that said, I grew up and I was abused and neglected, and everything was so dirty and I wasn't cared for. And so now I have so much anxiety around mess. I can't let anything be messy. And I feel like if the playroom is messy for 5 minutes, then I'm abusing my child. And then you have people from that same environment say, I'm now the messiest person ever because there was no one at that time to teach me how to care for myself. And even though I recognized that that wasn't safe for me, I still loved my mom. And so now I sort of feel more familiar in this dysfunction, even though I know it's not good for me. And then you have people that would say, my mom would never play with me because she always had to keep the house perfect. You had people say, my parents would scream at me to pick up my room and I didn't know how. And they would come in and put all my things in a trash bag and throw it away. I had my dad wake me up at 3 a.m. and start throwing things off my shelves because he told me to clean and he came home at 3 a.m. and decided it wasn't good enough. And I mean, these are not a small amount of stories. And I don't think even the people who were talking about these stories had connected because it's not like that was the only abusive thing their parent was doing. That was like a little blip in the big abusive radar. Um, but our society treats cleaning and dishes and stuff like it's this very easy throwaway character measure. Like everyone can do it. It takes 2 seconds.
It's a choice. You
And
make a choice to be clean.
exactly. So I don't think that many people give enough legitimacy to like, oh, no, I have like a pretty screwed up emotional relationship to these tasks
Yeah.
due to early adverse childhood experiences. There's this phrase that I love that says neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you have an experience in a certain emotional context over and over and over, your brain begins to sort of pair those two things together. And sort of an interesting example of this is that for a very, very long time, I really disliked the sound of birds. And the reason was because in the worst part of my addiction, I would come home from school, get high, wait for my parents to fall asleep, and then I would sneak out in the middle of the night and go get high all night. And then I would come home, sneak back in the house, and just lay there, either passed out or not be able to sleep. And when morning came, the first thing I would hear is the birds chirping. And there was this sense of I just spent hours in this like dark place, both physically and mentally. And then that weird feeling of like the morning birds, like that new life, new hope. It was almost kind of a slap in the face,
Mhm.
if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
reminder that like, oh, the rest of the world is now waking up to be productive, happy people. And I'm just this like bridge troll that can't function, that comes out at night. You know what I mean? And so that feeling of depression that I would feel in the mornings, when I heard those birds actually got linked in my brain. And so for many years after that, when I would hear those morning bird chirps, I just got this uncomfy, gross feeling. Um, and I don't feel that anymore because it's now been, 18 years since that. But your brain will do that with things. And so, if every time you tried to clean something, you were yelled at for it not being good enough, that may have not been quote unquote traumatic, But if it happened enough times, especially as a child, your brain pairs that feeling of disapproval with that act of cleaning. And if you're already somebody that struggles with the reward center of your brain and not getting enough dopamine, you're not going to want to go near those sort of tasks with a 10-foot pole.
So let's talk. You said your ADHD diagnosis came relatively recently. When was that?
Last year.
Last year. So how do you reflect on the things that you were able to reassess given the gift of hindsight and a new awareness of ADHD? How did those things connect?
I did experience some grief when I got the diagnosis. Um, there were some things about my life that were really hard, but in general, I have such a wonderful life now that I don't have this grief of like, oh, things could have been so different. Cause like I truly like I'm sober and I'm happy and I have a lovely family and a lovely career and all these things. And I actually, I did so much work, therapeutic work to get to a place where I accept myself and like myself. I think where the grief came in was like, man, I had to work so hard for that. And it shouldn't have had to been that hard. Like I got there eventually. I got here, right? But
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
sad that I had to work so hard to be okay with myself. Um, and looking back, it made me, I'm grateful that I developed the skills to not interrupt people because I know that there are many people that feel as though they're not being valued by me when I do that. And but I look back and think, we could have met those goals without making me feel like my personality made me a piece of shit. Like, we really
Yeah.
could have still
Yeah.
done that. Like, we could have gotten sober. We could have talked about how, and I was a very selfish person, but we could have talked about how I was being selfish without demonizing whole personality traits. Like, it could have both been true. Like, hey, you're not a bad person because you interrupt people. And when you interrupt people, this is the impact it has on them. So you need to reflect on whether that's the kind of relationship you want to have, whether that's the kind of impact you want to have on people. And if you would like to not have that kind of impact on people, if you want to be more loving in your relationships because you want people to feel valued and heard, here are some skills that we could implement to sort of stop that impulsive, thing. And, like you could still do that. You could still teach someone the impact of interrupting and how to not interrupt without basically making them feel like interrupting people makes them a selfish piece of shit. And so they just shut it down and lock it down forever.
So I'm curious about your timeline. So your book, it came out in 2020?
Yeah. So I self published the book in 2020. And then I just released a expanded version through a publishing house. So I worked with Simon and Schuster to do like this updated expanded version because the first version was like maybe 50 pages. Um, and since then, I've done a lot of work sort of bringing those principles to life and getting some more clarity around those principles and a lot more practical tips. And so the interesting thing was when I started my TikTok channel, I was not diagnosed. But I
Okay.
quickly started to attract all of the little ADHD community to my page going, oh, this
Mhm.
is the first thing that's ever helped me. These tricks work
Right.
so well for my brain. And people would ask me like, do you have ADHD? And I'd say, no, I don't.
Mhm.
But like, these things just work for my brain also. And I remember making one that's saying like, hey, I don't have ADHD. I just follow a lot of ADHD people. I just have a lot of tips that help people with ADHD. I just relate a lot to a lot of ADHD. I maybe need to make a phone call. Um, but I didn't think I was worried to like self validate that maybe I had ADHD because although I did fail out of high school, I also had an addiction. And previous to that addiction, I did very well in school. I've had a great career. And so I thought people who know me are going to think that I'm just being a fraud for the internet if I start saying that I think I have ADHD because I've been so successful. I didn't think
Oh, because you tied the success with not
exactly.
like, we've talked about this before. I can't be successful if I have ADHD.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
interesting.
got good
Yeah.
grades. I'm very intelligent. I liked school. I never felt distracted during school. Um,
Mhm.
but I also never did my homework. And so I literally had people that follow me just begin to comment over and over, like, KC, I'm not trying to be inappropriate here. I'm not trying to like diagnose someone on the internet, but like, you really seem ADHD. Like, you should really get an assessment. And so I actually, luckily, was already transferring psychiatrists away from a postpartum unit because I had postpartum depression onto a psychiatrist. And when she first met with me, she's like, I see in the notes that you have concerns you maybe have ADHD. Why is that? And I was like, well, the thing is that it's really hard for me to keep up in my home unless I have these like elaborate systems. Like everything has to be systematized. That just like feels good to my brain. Otherwise, I can't do it. And when I create the system has to be visual. And I showed her like this whole planner that I had created myself for like, these are the 5 things I do every night. This is the 1 thing a week I do. This is my star chart in order to keep track of it. I do this little list of 5 things every night. And I talked to her about how I didn't seem to have very good memory. I said, I only remember things if I'm being visually stimulated to remember them. Like if my kid spills an
Mhm.
applesauce on the floor, I can think to myself like, oh, I need to clean that. But then if I turn around and see that, the cats haven't been fed, I go, oh yeah, I got to feed the cats. And then I forget about the applesauce on the floor until the next time I see the applesauce on the floor and I go, oh, I got to clean that applesauce off the floor. And when I had 2 children that at the time were like 6 months and 18, or yeah, 6 months and 2, or I don't know, that all of a sudden became like untenable because like there's so much going on that I'm constantly just ping ponging back and forth and can't actually get everything done. And I showed her how messy my room was. I said, even though I do the same 5 things every night, I can't remember them. I have to look back at the list every single night, multiple times. And she said, okay, well, this honestly sounds exactly like a presentation of adult female ADHD. And then said, let me ask you some questions about your childhood. And she asked me if I had any of the learning disorders. And I said, yes, I have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and auditory processing disorder diagnosed in the 3rd grade. She said, well, there's a pretty high percentage of people that like who are diagnosed with those who are also ADHD. Did you have any addictions? And I was like, well, yeah, I had a lot of addictions. She was like, well, there's a pretty high percentage of people that get cross diagnosed with addictions and ADHD.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any vocal tics or like OCD behavior? And I was like, yeah, actually, I developed a vocal tic when my parents were getting divorced. And I had this weird thing about light switches for a while. They only come out when I'm really stressed. And she was like, because there's a really high percentage of people with vocal tics and it was just like, this is so bizarre. And then she finally explained to me that, ADHD is not about the inability to pay attention. It's about the inability to regulate your attention. And that the reason that me and so many other girls get sort of fly under the radar is she said, you were interested in school.
Yep.
Mhm.
You were
Mhm.
interested. So you didn't have to study. You didn't have to do homework. You didn't have to do any of these things because you were interested in the lecture and you could retain everything that you heard because it made sense in a systematized way in your mind. And when you got to a place where, you were removed from that structure, you could not create it. I said I would kept thinking I'll remember this homework and then I would forget it. Or I would write it down and then close the journal and then forget that I had ever written it down. Like I just had no way of creating my own structure to do homework. And when I got into high school, they changed the way that grades were weighted. Like it used to
Mm.
be that your class participation and your tests were like the main percentage of your grade. So even though I never did any homework, and I mean straight zeros, um, I was really fast. And so I was finishing a lot of my homework in class because I would get done with assignments before everybody else. And then anything left over, I was getting straight zeros on, but I was still getting A's because of the way everything was weighted. And
Mhm.
then I went to, because I was getting hundreds on tests. Then I go into The other thing is that they would say, okay, I'm going to teach you chapters 1 and 2. Then I'm going to give you a worksheet on 1 and 2, then homework on 1 and 2. And then I'm going to test you on chapters 1 and 2. So I'm listening to the lecture on 1 and 2 and I've got it. I don't need to do any of this other work when I ace the test. You move into high school and they start doing this thing where they go, I'm going to teach you chapters 1 and 2. You're going to go home and read chapters 3 and 4. And then
Right.
I'm going to test you on chapters 1 through 4. And all of a sudden, just paying attention in class wasn't cutting it. And I had no
Enough.
skills
Yeah.
to figure out how to study or do work outside of school.
But what's so interesting about that is, just to be fair, the structures that they were teaching you were not built for the structures that you then had to create for yourself. So,
Right.
there's like, again, in terms of taking responsibility and ownership for, our own shortcomings, part of it is because we don't understand universal design for education yet, and we'll figure it out.
Mhm.
Well, right. So looking back at that and going, gosh, I wish somebody would have noticed.
Yeah.
And just realize that what I needed was for someone to sit down with me and look at that. And I needed for my teachers to communicate directly with my parents what the homework assignments were. It just makes me sad, the amount of things that I could have done had I had more accommodations.
So I'm curious about, here we are today. So what is the message that you want to communicate to your followers? What are you hoping that they get from you?
What I hope that they get is, I hope that people who, what I affectionately refer to as the self-help rejects, where you've tried to get your life together, you've tried all of the different books and programs and worksheets and planners, you've tried all of these systems on how to sort of get it together because you kind of feel like a mess all the time and it's not working. And my message is that one of the reasons that that's not working is because we're approaching that from this sort of journey of worthiness where we feel like we're unworthy. And if we can get it together, then we'll finally be worthy and happy. And we're never going to find that where you're looking for it. We're looking for how to be better at anything from manifesting to budgeting to doing laundry to meal prepping to the kind of diet, the kind of exercise, the kind of relationship. But when we approach all of that from this perspective of, I need to do these things to get better, to be a more acceptable human so that I can be more worthy and then I'll be happier. It doesn't work that way. Those things are not designed to make you more worthy. They are designed to make your quality of life better. So we have to start from a foundation of worthiness. We have to start from neutralizing all of these things. These things are all morally neutral. You're not a better person if you can meal prep. They're just functional things. And the only reason to engage in them is because they make your life better. So if you're in a season of life where exercising isn't making your life better, don't do it.
Right.
Or if you're in a season of life where exercising would make your life better, but so would therapy, and you only have the time and energy for one or the other, prioritize whichever one is more important to you, not what society is telling you your life needs to look like. If we start with a foundation of worthiness, and my suggestion is that the best way to do that is through self-compassion. I'm not a big fan of self-esteem, but through self-compassion, we learn how to change the way we talk to ourselves about our house and our home care and our body care. And then neutralize as morally neutral all of these things. Then we can begin to go, I am a person that deserves to function. I can sort of start being creative and think outside the box about, I'm a person that deserves clean clothes. And since doing laundry is morally neutral, the only reason to do laundry is to have clean clothes. And if I'm not able to do laundry because some part of this is getting me stuck, then I get to retrofit laundry any way that works for me, whether that means I don't fold anything anymore. I send everything out to get washed and delivered in 24 hours. I mix my colors and my whites. I get rid of everything except for 7 days worth of clothing. You name it. I have a family closet where everybody's clothes go in the same closet. any way that gets you to the functional piece of clean laundry, this is where we get into, how do I hack my ADHD? How do I find adaptive routines and embrace this sort of adaptive imperfection, looking at these things as accommodations that I'm giving to myself and my home. Because what I notice is I don't have to do a lot of prescriptive, here's how to do the laundry, because if you set someone free from that journey of worthiness and realize that they're on a journey of care, all of a sudden their natural creativity comes out when they stop hating themselves for not being able to do the dishes.
As soon as they realize that the person that they're they're afraid is judging them, isn't in the room with them, watching them pull laundry out of the laundry basket. Nobody's watching. Nobody's opinion is going to change of you because that's the way you do your laundry.
Well, and it is an accommodation. It's interesting. I remember watching a conference, a session conference at the CHAD International Conference. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But anyway, it was a session. And one of the gals that was talking was saying that, like, having a house cleaner, having somebody that comes in and cleans your house is an accommodation. It's not a luxury. And we so tie it into this luxury thing to have, but it's not. It's an accommodation, just like what you're talking about with the hamper service, right? Being able to do that. And I think, I don't know if it was in your book, but I have said this before as well, and I think I did see it. If have paper plates sometimes, like, right? Like, if you don't want to do your dishes, that's a hack. Like, get the paper plates. Don't worry about it. Who cares? Like,
and it doesn't have to be black and white. Like, I for so long was like, okay, you're either someone that never uses paper plates or you're someone that only uses paper plates. And recently what I did was I sort of like faked a dish downsize where I moved all of my dishes like up to a different place. And I picked out like the amount of dishes that wasn't overwhelming for me to wash every day.
yeah.
Because, like, generally speaking, my kids will use 6 plates. I'll use 2 plates in a bowl. I have 2 cups for them, 2 cups for me and my husband, and then they have their water cups, and I have 1 coffee cup. And I put them in this one thing, and I just said, this is it. If I saw all of these dishes in the sink, I could still do them. And what I do is that, obviously, like, not every day is the same. But if I ever use all those and need more, that's when I dip into my compostable plates. Right? It's not all or nothing.
Right.
Some days I never use them. Other days, for whatever reason, I ate more meals at home, or we did more. So it's this overflow that I go, no matter what, I won't be overwhelmed because I only use a certain number of my washable dishes. But if I need something more than that, or if I go, frankly, this morning, I was so tired. I didn't know what was going on. So I went, this is the meal I'm going to use a compostable plate for.
Sure.
Like, you can mix and match.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can even see myself saying, okay, I want to keep the kitchen just a little bit cleaner, a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and do the paper plates right now, just so that I don't have to see the mess, like, just a little bit longer. So I love that. It doesn't have to be.
And my other, like, sort of ADHD awakening was so many people, it makes me so sad, would comment and say, like, I went to my psychiatrist and brought up the ADHD, and they said, okay, I probably did have it, but since I'm not in school, I don't need medication. And the amount of people that, or the amount of times I've been told, like, hey, it's really good to, so my psychiatrist at first said, like, it's good to take a break, to try to not take it on the weekends, or try to take 1 day a week. But what happened for me was I went back to her the next week and I said, well, here's the problem. I'm on an SSRI, an antidepressant, but the biggest breakthrough in my postpartum depression was when I started taking Vyvanse. I said, it is a life raft. And it is so capitalistic and patriarchal that we tell people you're allowed to have medication to go to work.
Right.
But you should take a break on the weekends. And it's like, has nobody spoken to a freaking mother about this? Because I need that medication on Saturday and Sunday. Almost more than I need it during the week.
You bet. Yeah,
like,
I agree.
When I'm taking my kids are 2 and 4, and Vyvanse stabilizes what I realized why I was snapping and getting irritable all the time. And I thought that was like a depression thing. And it might've been, but what was happening was for a lengthy amount of reasons, the ADHD, the postpartum depression, the trauma from the pandemic, when I experience this sort of dopamine lag of like, I'm tired and I'm not motivated and I can't engage my task initiation, and physically I feel like I have no energy in my body. Well, you pair that with little kids that are going to ask you for something every 7 minutes that's going to require you getting up. And you're either going to do it because you feel guilty because you don't want to be a shitty mom, or you're going to say no and then feel guilty. And then so eventually you just start getting irritated at them for asking.
Yep.
And you know that they behave better if you get them out, but you can't get your shit together enough on a task basis to get them out the door because that requires so many steps. And I said to her, here's the thing, I cannot afford to feel that way when taking care of my kids. I need to take care of my kids. I get them snacks. I need to do the laundry. I need to clean up the house. I need to do all of these things on Saturdays and Sundays. And God bless her. She said, okay, I think in this case, you should not stop taking them. You need to take them continuously. Like parents deserve to function on the weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that has been so largely debunked, the idea of needing a break. Like that is, we had, Bill Dodson on the show talking about, there he is writing a textbook about how to teach practitioners and prescribers how to prescribe medication, and said point blank, stop it. Stop saying that to people. Don't you want to feel as productive and good on the weekend as you do when you are at quote work? Don't you want to be as productive as a student doing your homework on the weekend as you do when you're in class at school? There is no medical reason. There's no physiological reason to stop. So it's debunked.
And it just goes along with that sort of myth of ADHD that it only affects work and school.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That like executive functioning
rational?
Isn't required to like live the rest of your life. And that it's and I think that idea that it's an attention problem. So the struggle must be that you can't pay attention at work or pay attention in school. But why would you need to pay attention that much on Saturdays and Sundays? Instead of really looking at it as to me, the executive functioning problems are the most disabling.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I honestly probably require a higher degree of executive functioning when I'm taking care of my kids than I do when I'm working on my online stuff.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's transition because we're getting along. I want to hear about the influencer part. I want to get back to that question I opened with. How did you end up with 1.4 million followers on TikTok?
Okay. So my sister told me to get on TikTok because she thought I would think it was funny. And I posted a few things here and there, no big deal. And then one day I ended up getting some time. It's like this miraculous, my kids took a nap at the same time, and I videoed me cleaning my house, and it was a disaster. And I have always had this way that I have sort of kept myself from being too overwhelmed. And it was something my psychiatrist mentioned to me, that one of the reasons why I had escaped being diagnosed for so long was because I was engaging in compensatory behavior at such a high level. I was like surpassing even neurotypical people's functioning for the most part. But it shouldn't have to be that hard. And she was like, it's not measured by how well you're doing. It's measured by how hard do you have to work to do that well. And so what I've always done when I look at a room and I see 1,000 things in it is I say, okay, there's not 1,000 things in this room. There's only 5. In any room you have ever been in, there's only 5 things. There's trash, dishes, laundry, things that have a place that are not in their place, and things that do not have a place. And I start with trash, and I get a trash bag and I clean up all the trash. And so I made this video showing, okay, look how it looks like when all the trash is gone. And then I get all the laundry, and now look at it. And I said, if you're somebody who struggles with depression or ADHD, or you just have kids, or you feel overwhelmed, see if this helps you. And that video blew up, and people started saying, this is the first thing that's ever helped me. And so I just started sort of riffing off of that and making more content like that and answering questions. And because I'm a therapist, the first time someone said, thank you for showing your house, I have so much shame over my inability to clean. And the idea to hear somebody say, it's okay, just do it a different way. And so I just sort of noticed that those were the videos getting the most hits. So it's like, all right, I'll keep talking about that. And sort of talking about that intersection of mental health and therapy and home and self-care. And I think that there's just not a lot out there about home care and lifestyle care in particular that isn't like hyper aspirational and
It's so true.
about being
Right. And I
aesthetically
mean, going back
pleasing.
to, yeah, and going back to you even bringing up the trauma when it comes to cleaning, this information is not there. It's not available
And that aspirational
until
stuff,
now.
yeah, until now, that aspirational stuff feeds into that existing problem of if I just get my life together, I'll feel better. Because there's
Yeah.
something that happens when you watch someone do a perfect pantry restock, or when you watch someone talk about this like perfect rainbow bookcase or their perfect what I eat in a day meal plan. Like you have an emotional experience watching that. It's peaceful or it's calming or there's some sort of like joy that brings or calm that brings. And that's fine. But I think what most of us do is we mistake the emotional experience of consuming that media for believing that it's a foregone conclusion that, okay, so then if I just did what this person is doing, then that feeling I had in 30 seconds of watching them, that could be my whole life. That's how I would feel all the time. I would feel this, whatever emotional, like that would be the feeling that I'm having if I were to do that. And that's not actually true. Like you can still enjoy your aesthetic cleaning videos and your organization stuff and like those videos still, they're like ASMR, right? Like they still are cool to watch, but you can also just be okay with that emotional experience just being, it's like when you look at a video of a puppy and you go, oh, and you feel how cute that is. But to then conclude that if I were to get a dog, I would feel that way all the time. And it would significantly, the quality of my life would just go through the roof because I would have that feeling all the time. Would you get that feeling sometimes? Yeah. But in some ways, it would be worse because you'd be picking up poop. You'd be, dealing with chewing up your shit. And so I think sometimes when it comes to social media, just recognizing, okay, the feeling that I have about how cool and warm and fuzzy this looks does not necessarily translate into like, I would feel that way if I just had a pantry that looked like that.
Well, this is why, I mean, I love home remodel shows, I love them when these external people come into somebody's house and they work with them and they build a plan and then the people go away and they come back for the reveal. Any of those formula shows, I'm
good.
Absolutely in. But what I really want to see subversively is I want to come back to that house a month later because I guarantee you it will be destroyed, a dumpster fire, because real life doesn't look like that. It looks like my house all the time. And I just...
You mean you don't have little fresh cupcakes on a tray on your island in the kitchen, just ready to
dare
eat
to
all
dream,
the
but
time?
that's why I watch home remodel porn, because it satisfies that chemical attraction that I have. And it's the same reason, we watch anything that makes bad. I just find that so delightful. I want to make that show, the horror show that is 1 month later. Like, let's just see how real people live in this fancy house.
I try to think of it also as like eating a good meal. Like it is true that when I get to a Sunday afternoon and I clean everything and I organize everything and I light a candle and I get some, like, it is true that gives me like a peaceful feeling that feels good. Like, wow, how serene.
Yeah.
But it's not possible to hold that feeling all the time and actually live in your house. And so I try to think of it as like, hey, I also like the feeling like pizza. When I eat pizza, like when you eat a good meal, that feeling of like, oh, it's amazing. It's incredible. But nobody expects you to have that feeling with every meal you eat. No one thinks that, well, so then if I just never stop eating pizza, if I just eat pizza every second of the day, I could have that feeling all the time, right? Like we kind of know that. Like we know, yeah, it's okay to think that that's peaceful. It's also okay to not like exhaust yourself and berate yourself at not being able to hold that space in that perfection all the time, as if it's an obligation
Mhm.
or as if it's even reasonable to be able to do so.
Yeah. Right. Well, and so that totally sidetracked us from this discussion of how you ended up
Oh yeah,
doing this.
sorry.
You did
I'm
the
such a
first
sidetracker.
video and
I did the
then,
first video,
and
then it
now
blew
there's
up.
this.
In 1 week, I went from 6,000 followers to 20,000. And someone commented and said, I'm just so grateful to find my people. I didn't think anybody else was like me. And I remember responding and saying, listen, I had 6,000 followers, posted that video, and now I have 20,000. So you're not only not alone, I think you're in really good company. And I said, off the hip,
Mm.
welcome to Struggle Care.
Yeah.
And that's where the
Oh,
sort of
cool.
brand name
Yeah.
came from. My website is called Struggle Care. My hashtag is Struggle Care. It's this idea that, I don't know really how to make you not struggle, but I can teach you how to care for yourself in the midst of that struggle. And we will work together on you being able to believe that you're worthy of that care, even if you're struggling. Like you're worthy of kindness, regardless of your level of functioning, even if the kindness is only coming from you.
That's beautiful.
And from
love
there, it
that.
just kind of took off. I mean, it just continued to build. I had I got up to about 500,000 followers. And then I had a video, I've had several videos go viral, but I had a video go mega viral, like 11 million views. And it was a video where I said, you are not lazy. There are hundreds of reasons why people struggle to do care tasks. And I think the combination of, because now there are other influencers out there doing, like kind of the unfiltered cleaning and things like that. But I think that I just got lucky that TikTok is a platform that really works well for my brain. And
Mhm.
I also think that having, as a therapist, being able to take this idea and actually break it down into like, okay, there are really 6 pillars that make up this foundational shift, and being able to actually pave a way for emotional change as opposed to just giving practical tips about laundry or dishes. Being able to do both of those things, I think, has created a space that is unlike other spaces. And so it's just been attracting people. And then I had a literary agent reach out to me, and then they hooked me up with a bunch of publishing houses. I've started pre-recording a podcast season. And I mean, it truly is just this bizarre trip of just like, the growth, just the followers just keep coming, and I just keep making the same kind of content.
How does it impact your actual practice as a therapist? Are you still seeing people?
No, I actually stopped seeing people. I stopped really working when I became a stay-at-home mom. And then, the pandemic happened and I was at home with both of my kids. And I feel like this platform has been a personal lifeline for me, because all of these sort of hacks that I've made in my home have all been since I started this channel, with the exception of that 5 things thing that I've been doing my whole life. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that, like, they're taking this journey along with me.
Sure.
As I'm sort of
Mhm.
solidifying some of these things and identifying them and changing the things around my home. And it's been a lifeline to me to experience feeling like it's really meaningful work for me.
You dropped viral and mega viral. What does that do to you when something goes viral? We've heard from others that it's not always what it's cracked up to be.
I'm pretty good at knowing what kind of criticism a video is going to bring. Um, and there are certain criticisms that I don't care. Like I know someone's going to call me lazy. I know someone's going to call me a bad mom. I'm prepared for that. And in fact, I welcome that, because I like to respond to those in videos, because number one, not necessarily to defend myself, because I don't need to defend myself against strangers on the internet, but I like to show people an example of, number one, me not feeling ashamed so that they could feel like they don't have to be ashamed. I like to give people an example of how to speak to their inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth is that we
Mhm.
call ourselves all of those things.
Yeah, it's not like the outer critic is like early to the party, right?
So that
Right.
doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I say it doesn't bother. It sucks. Like it stings to have people say that, but I know that they just don't understand and they don't get it. And I'm totally confident in who I am. The only ones that really bother me are, I have made some videos where I talk about like gender issues, especially like division of care, where I've talked about the effect of patriarchy on women. And whenever those videos go viral I can always tell when they get outside of my normal demographic, because I start getting extremely hateful, misogynistic comments. So typically on those types of videos, I eventually will turn comments off. Like there comes a point at which, whatever the number, videos will grow faster when comments are on, but there comes a point at which like I've already meaningfully engaged with the criticism or the hate in a way that's helpful to my audience. And so I'm not just going to like sit around and be bombarded with abusive language day after day. So I usually will turn the comments off on those kind of videos eventually. But for the most part, it's pretty predictable what people are going to be mean about. And so that doesn't bother me as much anymore.
You're predominantly on TikTok. In terms of favorite platforms, it seems like that's the one that, because it works for your brain, as you say, but do you have interest elsewhere?
Yeah, because I can turn a camera on and just start talking.
So you don't have to...
versus like sitting down and having to write captions and things.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, so what we're seeing is just off of the cuff a lot of times, just turning it on and saying, hey, I'm going to do this or whatever. And
almost always.
Yeah.
Which is why it's funny, like when I get brand deals and they're like, hey, can you do a TikTok this month? And I'll be like, okay. Like the idea of having to like think of an idea, because I just wake up, I go to bed every night thinking I have no more ideas. This is the end of the road for me. And then wake up and be like, oh, I have an idea.
Well, it's lovely. And we're so grateful for you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience. It's great. And the chat room has been very, very active over the last hour that you have been with us. So remember, if you are listening to this on the main feed, if you were a patron, you'd get a special version of this where Casey actually answers these questions that are coming to us. So head over to patreon.com/the ADHD podcast to learn more about that. Casey, tell people officially where they need to go subscribe right now.
So on TikTok, I'm at Domestic Blisters.
Awesome.
You can go to my website, strugglecare.com, and you can really get to anything I do from the website. You can get the book, an audio book. I have online courses on how to clean your depression house, ADHD friendly. I have workbooks on how to declutter, how to help your kids with care tasks, and then the information for any events that I'm attending. So the whole thing is just right there, plus all the links to my socials.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. On behalf of Casey Davis and Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. We appreciate your time and attention, everyone who is downloading and listening to this show. Jump over to the Discord channel in the Show Talk channel in our Discord server. That's where we're going to be hanging out, talking about this show. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.